visual artist. I'm based in the northeast of England, and what I suppose is most relevant to this course in relation to my practice is that the ideas that inspire me are rooted in what I would describe now as this concept of lively material. And I've arrived at this concept largely through an art practice that regularly works across disciplines. There we go. So I began working mostly in sculpture and print, and before I trained in fine art, I practiced psychology. So conceptually, I'm kind of fascinated by what drives us as human beings, our evolutionary trajectory as a species, and how we define progress, and where we came from, where we're headed, and the waste that we kind of leave in our wake, you might say. And this often leads me to reuse materials in my practice. So I'm interested in what's described within art as the found object, and that's to say, sorry, there we go. That is to say, normally objects that are associated with art materials, but that are objects that are normally not associated with materials, but that are incorporated into artworks through maybe an affinity that the artist has with or finds in the objects themselves. So this kind of practice was common in the work of the Surrealists and the Dada group, and it was also common in arte povera, the work of artists such as Marissa Merz, and can be traced through from these kind of beginnings to contemporary art practices, and in a variety of spheres, but also practices that adopt the use of animals or other living materials as medium, in approaches that are as diverse as here you see Damien Hirst's much quite controversial formaldehyde preserved cows in Mother and Child, or works such as Mark Dions' living ecosystem, Mucum vivarium. And Dion himself says here, this piece is in some way perverse. It shows that despite all of our technology and money, when we destroy a natural system, it's virtually impossible to get it back. In a sense, we're building a failure. So it's quite a meta work in the sense that he's using it there. So I base my practice in sculpture and print primarily, but I've moved in more recent years towards film, installation, sound, and increasingly biology as a means to express the ideas in my work. So whereas earlier my conceptual focus was on consumerism and waste, around 2013 I started to explore human technological progress and scientific research, and I became interested in the ways in which we're using living organisms in the context of the lab. And I started to explore our relationship to technology and biology and the way that we use it to enhance us as a species. So this was at the point at which I started to work more collaboratively with science and other disciplines on a more regular basis. And my first encounter with what I now describe as lively material arose when I was experimenting in the studio with the cyanotype print process. The deep sort of scientific blue that cyanotypes give, and their use as blueprints in the 19th century, echoed the genetics that I had been researching. And by happy accident, I think I can play this clip for you. By happy accident, my practical and my theoretical research collided when I came across cyanobacteria. And when I first saw these bacteria in the lab, I was really kind of humbled by them. These sort of instantly unremarkable glass jar of green liquids looked like this under the microscope. And essentially they were these sort of single-celled organisms, but they were moving and swimming before my eyes. And I started to learn a bit more about them and realized that they're some of the earliest forms of life on Earth, and that they came from the ocean 3.5 billion years ago, that they were the first species to photosynthesize, that they, in a sense, were the genesis of plants and animals, and therefore all forms of life on Earth. So they had this, for me, almost celestial, almost godlike kind of quality. They were potentially these organisms that kind of breathed life into our planet. And so in them I saw something that was arguably responsible for our existence on Earth, and quite a useful way to think about our kind of planetary consciousness and our relationships with other species. So this led to a number of works which explored our relationship with microbial bodies that live on and around us. And it eventually led me back into the lab to explore what it might feel like and what it might mean as a human being imposing cultural narratives on biological life through the process of genetic modification. So, and now this is where my notes have got muddled up. Yeah, here we go. So my most recent work in this field was Zone of Inhibition, which is a short film that asks those who work with genetically modified life to think anew about the lives of those that they work with. So this came about as a result of a genetic modification workshop that I ran, in which I'd invited a number of people across different disciplines to come in and learn how to genetically modify bacteria, but then have a kind of speculative conversation with the future kin of the bacteria that they had modified. And the resulting film is what I made here. And so it was around this time when I was doing my PhD research, which was in a genetics laboratory, that I began to use this term lively material to describe those elements of biological material that exist at the boundaries of what we normally define as life. So the DNA, the viruses, the single cells that are essential to life, but are not necessarily always conceived of as alive, particularly in the context of how they're used in the lab. And this was pre-pandemic, of course. So now the liveliness of biological material at this kind of scale is much more readily apparent to all of us. So whilst on the face of things, I'm working with molecular material as art medium and have done for a while now, I've done so because I wasn't comfortable with using any kind of higher level organisms in my artwork. And so the object that you see here visually kind of shows the sort of constraints applied to life through our technological entanglement with biological materials. So there are my genetically modified E. coli are existing in this structure here. And so just expanding a little on this definition of lively material, which I relate to what Manuel de Landa has described as an object's capacity to act, and also to Jane Bennett's concept of vibrant matter. The position that I've taken kind of comes from this philosophical trajectory that includes Spinoza and Derrida and Braidotti, to consider life as something that, as Braidotti says, we are all in this together, but we are not the same. And so coming back to my initial concerns regarding our evolutionary trajectory, I would say that I'm inherently interested in why we choose to exploit life in order to better understand it, and which seems kind of counterintuitive to me. So I'm interested in a position through which we can relate to forms of life on equal terms. And it's for this reason that my latest projects consider ways in which we might rethink experimental lab practices. On the one hand, to consider ourselves as test subjects, and on the other, to rethink our relationships with laboratory animals. So I know that was a completely whistle-stop tour of my practice, but I'm very conscious of this being a half-hour talk. And hopefully that you can see that whilst I work across mediums, my research methodology is much more about a performative relationship to material. And this is what I want to come on to explore now quickly in the work of some of the other artists who work more directly with animals in their practice. So what I want to do is talk to you about the work of Kathy High, Krut Durack and Alex Bailey, who I'm probably pronouncing Krut Durack terribly, I apologise, and Marcus Coates. And each of these artists works performatively at times, if not always, and yet their practices all approach their relationship to animals in quite different ways. So what I'm interested in drawing out by talking about these artists is the specific nuances of their relationship to animals. Are they using animals in their practice, or are they collaborating with animals? Or are they drawing on animals as sites of reference in some way? And what might these different forms of relationship with the animal make manifest through the work that they're producing? So the next slide has a little bit of nudity on it. I'm just alerting people to that. It's mild nudity. I'm going to begin with the work of Kathy High. Kathy is an artist who engages deeply with materials that impact her life personally. So as a feminist filmmaker, she's worked with her own body, in particular, considering the female body in relation to medical practice. And around the late 90s into 2000, she developed the work Animal Attraction, which is concerned with the field of interspecies telepathy. So here, Hai questioned the way we project ourselves onto our pets through deep research engagement with an interspecies telepathic communicator, Don Heyman, who's actually from an animal sanctuary in upstate New York. And her series of films, animal films from 2000 to 2005, attempt to either engage animals as collaborators or somehow enter the mind space of animals through portraying her own deep personal engagement with animal others on film. Now, we have links to all of this in the Alive Together website, so you can explore Kathy's work in a lot more detail. She became interested in the field more broadly known as bioart through its relation to her own practice, which might be described as part activism, part art, and part ethics. And whilst many see bioart as a kind of fascination with taboo or transgressive acts, in fact, I think quite a number of us in this group were part of a conference that's just happened, Taboo, Transgression and Transcendence in Art and Science, which was just the past few days here. But most artists who have an interest in this field, people like Kathy, it's as much about a material form of engagement with the broader biopolitical and socio-political questions that working in these ways actually entails. So in Embracing Animal, this is a work which Kathy describes as a multimedia interspecies or scientific installation of exchanges between people and animals. Around this time, Kathy Hai became particularly interested in rats infused with human DNA, used for pharmaceutical research. And I know I gave a warning on a previous image of nudity, but I think in some ways this image of nudity might be even a little more alarming for some people than the previous one. Kathy has Crohn's disease, and these rats were created to treat diseases like hers. So what interested Kathy was what are these animals and how could she intervene and create an environment that might sustain their lives in ways different from the lab. So she decided to create a rat paradise, and she was curious how to treat them as she had with her own illness. So she did things like give them homeopathy and different kinds of care to the care that they would receive in the lab. They lived longer than they should have. Having interviewed one of the researchers that developed them, she could confirm this. And her care extends beyond the boundaries of the exhibition context, because after the exhibition was over, she planned to take them home with her. But as it turned out, the night watchman on the exhibition, who basically had the most engaging time with the rats because they were nocturnal animals, actually asked Kathy if he could have them as pets because he'd grown so attached to them, so he took them home with him. And Kathy went on to design burial globes and a skin-to-skin dome and a rat maze, amongst other objects, in homage to laboratory rats, in a way in which she wanted to try and bring her relationship with the animals into a more direct relationship with the scientists who work with the animals also. So her deep care and respect for these animals, without whom her own illness wouldn't be better understood, is very manifest in this sort of public celebration of their lives. So through her work with rats in the lab, Hai also came to realise that rats have a whole register of communication in the ultrasonic range. And fascinated with what their lab experience is like, she took a bat detector into the lab. She'd been inspired by Dr. Jake Panksepp's research into the sounds of rat laughter. And so what Hai did was she used the bat detector to listen to the sounds in the lab. And what she heard when she listened were some really quite harsh noises, one which turned out to be, for example, scientists taking plastic off a syringe. So because of the work that she was doing in the lab, she was able to have conversations with scientists about changing some of their practices in the lab. And she's now looking to make a chorus of rat laughter. In fact, I think she has, made a chorus of rat laughter by working on, through her inspiration with Dr. Jake Panksepp's research. And what really interests me about Kathy's practice is that she's kind of seeking to deepen her relationship with these animals that she coexists with or somehow have an impact on her life. There's no sort of, or rather, there isn't a strong aesthetic desire to act in the formal sense, but it's a performative desire. So Hai talks of what she wants to achieve with her rat laughter project as she talks about it very humbly. She talks about, I just want to lighten the rat's load for a moment. So Performances for Pets, otherwise known as Kruk Durack and Alex Bailey, is an ongoing project born out of an earlier work, Auto Domestication, which aims to explore what might be held as the value of a pet. So starting from Urack's observations, working alongside a rented cat in an artist residency in Vienna, Urack stated that the value of a pet is not what it does, but what it is, something about the value of being, which Urack related to the value of gentrification by artists, you know, this idea that the product of, that there is a production of results simply by existing. And in Auto Domestication, Urack made this statement: a responsible artist guardian loves and cares for his artist, provides a workplace, healthcare and nutrition, and training to control the actions of the artist, sets aside regular playtime and grooming periods, and cleans up after the artist. An artist is a privilege and a commitment. So Riley comparing the role of the artist to that of the pet as something, or someone rather, engaged in immaterial labour. So this led to a series of works in which, excuse me, not sure where that went like that, a series of works in which Urack and Bailey present themselves as performers, both in the gallery space and in domestic settings. In a way, they're equating their status as artists to the contemporary status of pets, who one might argue the only function, or rather the function, is to provide comfort, companionship, and perhaps also entertainment. Because they say that contemporary pets no longer have a practical function in the household. Cats don't need to catch mice. Dogs no longer need to guard the house. So whilst their approach to performance is to an extent light-hearted, they take their work very seriously, learning their skills from professional dog and cat trainers / coaches, whom they describe as their dramaturges. Now, with Performance for Pets, the artists are engaging in a practice which changes the performative role of the artist from that of performing with to one of performing for. So in a sense, this is a theatrical engagement where the actors are human, but the stage set and the audience have an umwelt other than entirely human. And this aim to provide entertainment for animals is similar to artist Rachel Mary's Primate Cinema, Apes as Family. To make Primate Cinema, Mary collaborated with comparative psychologist Dr. Sarah Jane Vick to test different styles and genres of film to gauge chimps' responses, and she was discussing issues around cognition and communication in primates. And whilst the aims appear similar, Mary's work engages primarily with questions that focus on our behavioural similarities to apes. You know, how do our cognitive abilities differ from those of chimpanzees? Do we share preferences for novelty and perhaps even form with our closest relations? Urack and Bailey's motivations perhaps stem more from a critique of utility in contemporary society, but they're also interested in behaviours. Referring to the role reversal that pervades their practice, Urack talks of the dog clicker as something which the human is now trained to use as much as the dog is trained to respond to. So taking a position that conceives of the animals as training the human as much as the other way around. And this is something that you'll also hear from Maya Smrekar, who's going to be joining us, in relation to the evolutionary trajectories of humans and their various companion animals. I realise I'm racing through this. I've got a lot of content here, but I just want to give you as good an overview as I can in a short space of time. So I'm going to come on quickly now to the practice of Marcus Coates, which is largely concerned with how we relate to each other and to plants and to animals. And Coates centres around what he describes as our relational tools and testing the degree to which we can or can't relate, and also what defines this relationship. So Coates' approach is playful and investigative, and in his work you rarely see animals. Instead, it's the imagined space and embodied space that they occupy within us that interests him. perhaps even our shared consciousness, he says. So he includes shamanistic rituals often in his practice. And these imagined spaces are what he describes as places for exploration, the sort of frontiers of our imagination. As a child, Coates played with his brother in the living room of their home, creating an imaginary space the size of a Siberian tiger, which they created from this list of dimensions that came from a childhood book which described the tiger. And they were amazed by the size of this tiger, and therefore they wanted to create a space where it could be alive for them. So creating this space in the imagination allows for a kind of consensus imagination, which is a term that Coates has used. And he's interested in this relationship, this inner relationship that we can create within ourselves through a kind of dialogue between states of mind or states of being. I think I can play you very briefly a clip here. I don't know if you can hear. Can you hear this on your screens?
No.
No. I'm not sure why. Okay, that's a shame, but do check Marcus Coates' website, and in the Alive Together website we have a Marcus Coates case study, but you can also check his website where you can hear a lot of these clips. What's really interesting here is that he's trying to vocalize or make sounds without the breath, but using the air contained within his body. So there's no inhaling or exhaling. So this piece is called Humpback Whale. So this might be of interest to, I think it's Natalie in the group in particular. Yeah, so what he's trying to do is embody this idea of another species. And in Skylark, what Coates does is he tries to take on the strategy of Skylark's song. So he's singing without repetition or hesitation. So rather, a Skylark sings without hesitation or repetition whilst flying. And he's trying to mimic this. This video shows him making several sounds, trying never to repeat the same sound. And so what he's wanting to do here is discover this kind of ability to invent without prediction or planning. And so he's using his body as this kind of automatic tool for creativity. In another couple of his works, Sound of Others and also Dawn Chorus, he takes these ideas a little further. And here he talks about using technology as a form of extended mind. So in Dawn Chorus, what you're seeing in these two video images here are people where he has recorded the sounds of birds singing at dawn and slowed the sound right down to a level where it's very easy for us as humans to mimic. And so here we have people mimicking those sounds, which he then speeds back up. And so it again sounds like bird song. And he gathered a whole range of people doing this and presented it as a dawn chorus. And similarly with Sounds of Others, what he's done here is he has captured the sounds of various types of animal and has slowed them down or sped them up to points at which the similarity between species becomes really evident. And these are wonderful pieces to listen to. If you have the opportunity, I would highly recommend it. Finally, the last piece of Coates' work that I want to just draw attention to is his collaboration with primatologist Volker Sommer. So here, a list of behavioural traits formulated as questions came about as a result of conversations that Coates had with Volker Sommer, discussing the significance of his attempts at becoming animals. So together they came up with this idea to list the behaviour traits of the distinct group of apes known as hominini, I believe is the correct term. I'm sure the ethologists in the group can correct me, which includes chimpanzees, bonobos, and humans. And therefore, the answers to these questions don't distinguish the species, but rather they distinguish individuals, because it may be the case that members of each species would answer yes to any one of these questions. And so what it's doing, therefore, is it's highlighting our similarities as much as our differences. So what's interesting, therefore, I find in the work of Coates is that, like Cathy High, he's interested in attempting to become or embody animal in many ways. But whereas Cathy's often doing this from a very personal place of empathy, Coates is often doing this more from a place of learning about himself and about the limits of human possibility. Kind of absolutely raced through, I'm going to stop sharing now, a number of different works there and a number of different artists' works, but hopefully that's given you a bit of a whistle-stop overview of a number of different ways in which artists have somehow drawn on the human-animal relationships in their practices. I deliberately went fairly fast there and I included a lot of works, but I wanted to do that because I wanted to just give you a teaser so that if you're interested in any of these works, you can go and explore them in a little more detail.